You sat down to work. You had the time. You had the intention. Maybe you even had a plan. But within 10 minutes, you were somewhere else entirely. Not physically, but mentally. And the strange part is that you didn't even notice it happening. One moment you were focused, and the next you were scrolling, or staring at nothing, or suddenly very interested in reorganizing your desk. You didn't choose to lose focus. It just happened. And if you've been blaming yourself for that, calling yourself undisciplined or lazy or just not built for deep work, this video is going to reframe that entirely. Because the problem isn't your willpower. The problem runs much deeper than that. And it starts inside your brain before you ever sit down to work. Most people approach focus as a choice. They believe that if they wanted it badly enough, they could simply decide to concentrate and stay there. But neuroscience tells a very different story. Focus is not a decision. It's a biological state. And your brain has specific reasons, built-in, evolutionary reasons, for resisting it. Understanding those reasons is the first step toward actually changing your relationship with attention. Not through discipline alone, but through genuine understanding of what's happening beneath the surface. The human brain was never designed for sustained, single-task concentration. That might sound like an excuse, but it's actually a factual description of your brain's architecture. The brain's default state is scanning. Its primary job for hundreds of thousands of years was to monitor the environment for threats, opportunities, and social signals. A brain that locked into one thing for hours at a time would have been a dangerous brain in a world where survival depended on awareness. So your nervous system evolved to shift attention frequently, to treat novelty as important, and to treat prolonged stillness as a potential warning sign. That ancient system is still running inside you right now, and it has no idea you're trying to write a report or finish a project. This is where the modern environment becomes a serious problem. The world you live in today didn't gradually introduce stimulation. It flooded you with it. Notifications, social feeds, short-form content, group chats, breaking news, email alerts. Every single one of these systems is designed by engineers and behavioral psychologists to capture your attention, and they're very good at it. Each ping, each scroll, each unexpected update activates a tiny release of dopamine in your brain. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter associated with seeking behavior. It doesn't produce satisfaction. It produces the urge to look, to check, to pursue. And when your environment is structured to trigger that system dozens of times per hour, your brain gradually recalibrates to expect that level of stimulation constantly. Here's what that recalibration actually looks like in practice. When you sit down to do focused work, something that doesn't offer constant novelty, doesn't reward you every few seconds, and requires you to sit with difficulty, your brain compares that experience to its new baseline. And the baseline, if you've been living in a high-stimulation digital environment, is extremely high. Deep work feels slow by comparison. It feels unrewarding. It feels boring in a way that creates almost physical discomfort. So your brain doesn't just lose interest, it actively generates the impulse to escape. That restlessness you feel when you try to focus isn't a personality flaw. It's your dopamine system reacting to what it perceives as a low-stimulation environment. The contrast between your normal digital life and a quiet work session is so dramatic that your brain treats the quiet like something is wrong. There's a concept in neuroscience called attention residue, and it explains something most people have never considered. When you switch from one task to another, even when you intend to fully shift your focus, a portion of your cognitive attention remains on the previous task. Researchers found that when someone checks their phone during a work session and then returns to work, their performance on the work task is measurably reduced, not just for a few seconds, but for several minutes. The brain is still partially processing the interrupted context. So every time you check a notification, look at social media, or switch tasks even briefly, you're not just losing a few seconds. You're pulling your cognitive bandwidth in two directions simultaneously, and deep focus becomes structurally impossible. People who feel like they can't concentrate for more than a few minutes often aren't experiencing a focus problem. They're experiencing the accumulated effect of dozens of tiny interruptions that have fragmented their attention into almost unusable pieces. But there's another layer here that most productivity conversations completely ignore, and it has to do with how your brain perceives cognitive effort. The prefrontal cortex is the region responsible for logical thinking, planning, self-regulation, and sustained attention. It's also metabolically expensive. The brain uses about 20% of your body's total energy, and the prefrontal cortex demands a significant share of that. When you engage in genuinely deep, cognitively demanding work, your brain is spending real resources. And like any resource management system, it looks for ways to conserve. This is partly why your mind wanders during complex tasks. Your brain is essentially proposing an energy-saving shortcut. It's not sabotaging you. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. The challenge is that the tasks that matter most in modern life, writing, analyzing, creating, learning, are precisely the tasks that demand the most from your prefrontal cortex. So there's a constant low-level tension between what you're trying to do and what your brain prefers to do. Mental fatigue adds another dimension to this. Cognitive fatigue is not just tiredness. It's a real neurological state in which the brain's capacity for executive function becomes genuinely impaired. Research in this area shows that after sustained mental effort, people don't just feel tired. They make measurably worse decisions, struggle more with impulse control, and have significantly reduced ability to maintain attention. This means that by the time many people try to do their most important work, often in the afternoon or evening, after a full day of meetings, emails, and constant decision-making, their brain is already operating in a depleted state. And then they blame themselves for not being able to focus. What they're actually experiencing is the predictable biological result of cognitive depletion. The brain has been running processes all day, and it simply has less capacity left for demanding tasks. There's also something important happening at the identity level. Most people who struggle with focus have developed a self-narrative around that struggle. They believe they are someone who can't concentrate. And that belief is not neutral. It actively shapes behavior. The brain is a pattern recognition and pattern reinforcement machine. When you hold a consistent belief about yourself, your brain tends to generate behavior that confirms that belief. So if you've spent months or years thinking of yourself as someone who gets distracted easily, your brain has essentially learned to perform that pattern automatically. You don't consciously decide to lose focus. The identity belief runs the process beneath awareness. This is why simple productivity hacks rarely work long-term. You can install an app that blocks social media, but if you still believe at a deeper level that you're not someone who can do sustained, focused work, your brain will find another path to distraction. The behavior is an expression of the belief, and the belief needs to be examined before real change can happen. Understanding this identity mechanism also reframes what discipline actually is. Discipline is not a character trait that some people are born with. It's a cognitive habit, a practiced pattern of choosing long-term benefit over short-term comfort, repeatedly, until it becomes somewhat automatic. But building that pattern requires that your brain associate focused work with something more rewarding than escape. And this is harder than it sounds in an environment that's constantly offering easier, faster dopamine. The only way to rebuild that association is gradually, through consistent exposure to the experience of completing focused work and allowing your brain to register the slower, deeper reward that comes from it. Progress, completion, understanding. These produce their own neurochemical responses, but they take longer to arrive, and they're subtler than the instant hit of a notification. Your brain needs time and repeated experience to start valuing them over the quick alternative. The practical implication of all this is not a list of hacks. It's a deeper shift in how you structure your environment and your expectations. Your environment is not neutral. If your phone is visible while you work, research shows your cognitive performance is reduced simply by its presence. Not even by using it, just by knowing it's there. Your brain allocates a portion of attention to monitoring it because it's learned to associate the phone with potential rewards. Removing that stimulus entirely changes the neurological situation. Creating physical and digital conditions that reduce the availability of competing stimulation is not about discipline. It's about reducing the gap between your brain's baseline stimulation expectations and what your work environment offers. The smaller that gap, the less resistance your brain generates when you try to settle into focused work. Timing matters in a way that most people don't account for. Your brain has natural cycles of higher and lower cognitive readiness. For most people, the window of peak prefrontal function falls in the morning hours, before decision fatigue has accumulated and before the brain has been flooded with social information. Using that window for your most demanding work, rather than for email or social media, is not a time management tip. It's a neurological strategy. You're matching the demands of the task to the actual capacity of your brain at that moment. Most people do this backwards. They ease into the morning with low-effort digital consumption and then try to do complex work when their cognitive resources are already partially spent. Finally, there's something worth sitting with as you think about all of this. The inability to focus that so many people experience today is not primarily a personal failure. It's the predictable outcome of a specific set of conditions: an overstimulated environment, a misunderstood brain, a cultural narrative that rewards busyness over depth, and a technology ecosystem that profits from your divided attention. When you understand these conditions clearly, the self-blame starts to loosen. Not because nothing is your responsibility, but because responsibility is more useful when it's informed. You can't change something you don't understand. And you can't address a neurological and environmental problem with motivation alone. Focus is not something you either have or don't have. It's something your brain is capable of, under the right conditions, with the right understanding behind it. The question was never about your willpower. It was always about understanding what your brain actually needed and what the modern world has quietly been taking from it.